And welcome to another episode of the Humble Heretics Podcast with your boy Brad.
It's your boy John.
And we are here to talk to you today about justice. We are going to get into the definition. We're going to talk about the reality of justice in our world today. And we are also going to talk a little bit about social justice as well, because that's inherently tied into a lot of the matters of justice. And I think a lot of people, when they think about justice, that's the kind of activism that they lean towards. And so it's just a necessary component now to talk about this. So let's get into a little bit of the definition of justice, because I think when people throw out just and justice, it seems to me that folks like to conflate terms, right? And we make justice solely based on fairness, but that's not what justice is simply about. It's not merely fairness, because if it was fairness, then we wouldn't need the term. And so we'll start with the word just, because that's what justice is predicated on, that which is just. And something that is just is based on or behaving according to what is morally right. So that's the first thing, something that is morally right and fair. It's regards treatment that is deserved or appropriate in some given circumstances, and also has something to do with an opinion or an appraisal of something that is well-founded or justifiable. We use the term phrase just criticism. But for the nature of our conversation, we are going to be talking about really the first definition and maybe that second one with regard to what is deserved or appropriate in any given set of circumstances. And then the term justice means just behavior or treatment. I'm gonna go on a little bit of a tangent there. I had a teacher in high school who said never used the word in the definition, and seeing that justice and injustice just sends chills down my spine. That's so offensive. So just behavior or treatment, that's the first definition for justice. Second definition, the quality of being fair and reasonable. So again, this ties back into fairness. Fairness is a key part of justice, but it's not everything. And the administration of the law or authority in maintaining justice. So, and we think about the instances of mistrial, or someone is put behind bars that's innocent for a while. There's a country artist that I listen to who has a whole song about a notable case in American history where that happened. So, it's called Cadillac Jack Favor. I'll circle back to it probably in the recommendations section, but the whole story of the Cadillac Jack Favor, and this kind of can roll us into a discussion about the reality of justice, is Cadillac Jack Favor was a rodeo guy, John, and
yeah, I'm here. I'm listening to you.
He was known to be a very helpful guy, and give a ride to the hitchhiker on the side of the road to help them get to wherever they need. And this is back in like the 50s and 60s, and we're talking about a white man. So he did that once, and the two gentlemen he picked up, he dropped them off in a place called Bossier City in Louisiana, and they committed a robbery that turned into a double homicide, and the crime went unsolved for some time. And apparently what happened is they found one of the guys that actually did it in prison doing time, and he pinned it all on Jack Favor. So they arrested him, pinned him for this double homicide that happened, and threw him in prison. It didn't take,
it's terrible. No, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it took an act of the Supreme Court to bust this guy out.
I'm sure it did. Yeah, that's usually how it goes.
And so it's But that's how things go with like justice nowadays, and we can even talk about justice in regards to George Floyd and the way he was treated with once he was in custody. Like there's no reason to have your knee on a person's neck. There's so much to say that this country does not seem to care about justice, regardless of a person's race. They're interested in the next election year, really. If they're in an elected position like sheriff, district attorney, in some cases judges too. So, like, it's ridiculous.
Absolutely, yeah. Unfortunately, that is there's a lingering problem in the system that we have here in America. It's one of the reasons that I am not an ardent supporter of the death penalty, is because of the flaws in our justice system that prevents us from being confident that we detain and prosecute and ultimately convict the proper people behind crimes. And so, I'm a guy who would be in support of the death penalty under a situation where we could know for certain that the person that committed the crime was the guilty party. But unfortunately, we've seen too many times in our system where that's just not the case. So.
Yeah. And I think there was something you were celebrating recently. It was the, the Safety Act that was passed in Illinois. You said something very, very worthy of celebration and some of the most comprehensive criminal justice reform that we see in the nation. Do you want to kind of, what is that? Like, I haven't got a chance to read about it a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to save it for a little later, but we could definitely get into it now. So the Safety Act is something that's going to go into effect in Illinois in 2023. Essentially, the Safety, Accountability, Fairness, and Equity Today Act, otherwise known as the Safety Act, passed in Illinois with the backing of the Legislative Black Caucus on January 13th, 2021. Now, that Safety Act goes into effect in 2023. Obviously, there have been there's been time to prepare given because of the depth of sweeping reform that comes inside of this. When most people hear about the Safety Act for the first time, the first thing they're going to hear is the Republicans' talking points, because they have opposed this act and they have gone on a full-on media campaign to denounce the act and to persuade people against it. And so the talking point typically is that they think this bill is an attack on public safety. You will hear them say that police will not be able to arrest people for crime anymore. We're not going to be able to take dangerous and violent criminals into custody. You're going to hear those kind of talking points, and they're all blatant lies. And so I have been talking about this act with people because I want us to be informed as a proletariat. I want us to have a proper understanding of laws as they get passed. And I want us to understand how beneficial the Safety Act is for the system in Illinois and for the system nationwide. And so the big point that people have gotten kind of caught up with is cash bail. And so there is a provision in the bill that abolishes cash bail effectively in Illinois.
And that's the controversial part.
Yeah,
I'd seen that, and that kind of is very, very concerning, especially for someone who's a Republican, because it seems like it's just flies in the face of public safety and preventing. Because someone pointed out, it's. You know what? No, I don't see that in the article. But the idea is by eliminating the cash bail system, people think that, okay, well, now that just means violent offenders are going back on the street. Now, a representative, Chicago Democrat, Justin Slaughter, argues that it will make it more difficult for violent offenders to be released compared to lower level nonviolent offenders. And I mean, I kind of wonder how you're going to do that, eliminating the cash bail system.
So here's what the actual bill has inside of it. Okay, and for those that are listening, I'm going to implore you to please go and do your research. You can easily look up the full text of this bill by just searching the Safety Act. It's going to come right up for you, and you'll be able to see these things. But as far as the cash bail portion goes, and then I want to talk about a few other points here. The cash bail portion basically says that if a violent, dangerous offense occurs, and the police come and they arrest someone, okay, the verbiage of the law is that essentially we're going to presume, as we're supposed to, that this person is innocent, okay, in terms of the system, and they're going to be presumed eligible for pretrial release unless the prosecutor can present an argument to the opposite effect, basically. So what we're seeing here is the cash bail is going to go away, but in reality, there's not this huge change in how that what's the word I'm looking for, procedure will go, right? The procedure typically when you go to jail is you're going to get arrested, you're going to be detained in the jail, you're going to go before a judge. They're going to hear arguments from the defense and the prosecutor, and then they're going to issue you a bail if your offense can be issued a bail. So if it's not like a murder one charge, you're typically going to get a bail, right? And then you can pay that bail to be released. The change here is to protect people that can't. What people don't understand is how bad cash bail actually is for the average American. Okay. Most people with money have been able to buy their way out of jail for years, like for literally decades, in our justice system. Right. Well, actually probably for centuries now. If you're a poor person and you go to court and the judge says, I'll give you $100,000 bail. Well, listen, you could be as innocent as the day is long, and you're going to go before a judge who says you got a $100,000 bail. That's $10,000 cash that you'll have to pay out. You don't have $10,000. No one in your family has $10,000. And even if you're innocent, you're going to sit in jail until you go to trial, which could be months. That's months that your family is going to go without your contribution. That's months that you're going to suffer in a jail where you may have been innocent the entire time, and you have to just sit. What abolishing the cash bail does is it takes away that factor. So now when you go before the judge, because again, the talking point of the Republicans has been that we're going to have chaos on the streets because we can't even arrest criminals. And that's completely false. You can arrest them. They will go to jail. But then when they go before a judge, the judge will hear arguments. And essentially, the system is now going to say, we're going to do what we're supposed to do, which is presume this person innocent. And we're going to presume that they're eligible for pretrial release. And then if the prosecutor has some strong piece of evidence that says, clearly this person had a smoking gun in their hand when we found them, the judge is going to say, oh, we can't release you because there's evidence here that suggests you actually did do this crime. And then you're going to be detained in jail. On the flip side, if there is no strong supporting evidence that you committed this crime, you're going to be released with a court date. And you're not going to have to pay $10,000 out of pocket to do it. And so that's where what this bill really does in terms of cash bail. But again, because of politics in this country and because we're so determined to present false information to push our narrative, people are going to be misinformed. Most people are going to be very misinformed about this bill. They're not going to know what actually is going on.
Okay. Now, what do you think about this pushback that Senator John Curran gave from Downers Grove, who he says that he would prefer one where, like they use in New Jersey with the limited cash bails in certain circumstances, like classifying crimes at a certain level qualifies you for cash bail where others do not, and you have to be held in detention. Like, for instance, violent crimes of, say, Class B, Class A kind of thing. Because I think we use a letter system here in Indiana or a number system. Either way, it doesn't matter, but still, like, say you have a Class A and Class B. Yeah. Someone's has been arrested for a Class A or Class B offense. That person doesn't get to have bail, but someone like a C, D, or, lower.
Of course, yeah. So
is eligible, or there is no cash bail for that person.
Here's the challenge. The challenge is always, for me in this particular topic, it's going to be hinged on this. Do we or do we not presume innocence? If we presume innocence, then cash bail is totally unnecessary because you are innocent until proven guilty, right? If you are innocent until proven guilty, if that's true, if we're going to hold to that, then when I go to jail for whatever the crime, let's say I go to jail for armed robbery, right? I get picked up on the street. I fit the description. An armed robbery happened 2 blocks away. You look like the guy they say did it, right? I go to jail. When I go before the judge is going to say, we don't know if this guy did this or not. And unless the prosecution has strong reason to believe he did, I'm going to release this guy until his trial date. That's what this effectively does, this law does, right? With a tiered cash bail system, you still have the problem of this person who may be innocent, who really we're supposed to start with the assumption that he's innocent, is going to go to court, and we're going to assume he's guilty, so we're going to keep him in jail unless he gives us a certain amount of money. And we don't ever stop to really state what cash bail is from that perspective. And that's really what it is. It's the state saying, I'm going to hold you hostage unless you pay me. And if you give me a ransom, I'll release you back to the streets.
It's a very poignant argument.
Yeah, well, that's what cash bail is. And so...
well, I mean, even then, it still kind of flies in the face of the basis, the foundation for what the American justice system is predicated on.
Yep.
That someone is innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
I didn't ever think of it that way. And when you look at it from that way, cash bail makes no sense whatsoever because it is pretty much legal hostage taking.
Because why are we holding people in jail for money? Because that's literally like the argument is, you got arrested, we think you did it, and you can pay us to get out. But
it's
other
a profit
than that,
generation machine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We think you did it, but if you pay us, we'll let you go.
Yeah.
Right? This system says, if we really think you did it, you can't pay us to let you go. We're going to keep you.
Yeah.
But other than that, we're going to let you go until it's time for you to go to court.
That's sensible.
Right? But so you see, like, that's what I mean. So it's real simple. But just in regard to this bill, there's changes in how police use of force is applied. Complaints and misconduct is addressed by this bill. Certification and decertification processes for police is involved in this bill. There are a ton of good changes that are getting completely ignored so that people can make an argument on behalf of cash bail to turn this whole bill around. When in reality, so let's talk about that, right? So let's talk about pretrial. So this bill is designed to prevent the result of a risk assessment from being the sole basis for a detention decision. That's the verbiage, right? So what that means is that the bill is designed to prevent you being detained in jail solely based on whether or not we think you'll come to court and solely based on whether or not you can pay, right? There is, inside of that same part that they're complaining about, there is a pretrial practices data oversight board that is established by this bill. There is a domestic violence pretrial practices working group established by this bill. There is a notification of pretrial hearing for crime victims that's going to be added. They're changing the offense class for violations of conditions of pretrial release, which means that there'll be stiffer punishment if you skip out on your court date when you've been given a pretrial release. They're changing the pretrial release procedures, which is currently, release on your own recognizance, warrant alternatives, conditions of release, electronic monitoring, home confinement revocation, modification, and sanctions. So, like, pretrial release doesn't just mean the police, because this is how it's being framed. There's a video going around right now that's really popular, and it's the sheriff in like a suburb of Chicago, and he's basically saying, if this bill stays in place, my police won't be able to arrest criminals. And it's the worst, gross misrepresentation of this bill that I've heard yet. And it completely misrepresents what's actually happening. A person gets arrested, they go to court, and they get released unless there's evidence to hold them. That's literally what's happening here. And when the judge releases you, guess what? If it's a crime like armed robbery, right? The judge doesn't just release you, right? More than likely, the judge is going to release you to something like home confinement, right? Because that's a provision within that change. So I am releasing you pending pretrial, but I'm going to release you on home confinement. Well, what's home confinement? It's where they put a band around your ankle, right? And you're going to be confined to your property lines, with the exception sometimes of allowing you to go to work. And that's it. And I think that's a huge improvement on what we currently have in place. And your pretrial release can be revoked if you violate certain circumstances, right? So, I mean, there's a ton in there, man. There's correctional changes. I mean, there's just a lot here that's good for the system. And the conservative side has picked one point to try and beat this thing in the ground as a bad change, simply because what it's really going to do is it's going to hold the system accountable for actually treating people appropriately. There is not going to be chaos in the streets of Chicago. I heard someone use the word purge. There's not going to be some massive purge on the streets of Chicago. This is just going to be a change in what it looks like when you interact with the police, when you interact with the court system, when you interact with the jail system. It's going to be a change that is going to be for the better in how people are treated. Flat out.
Point blank, period. Wow. Yeah, I mean, just like scrolling through this article that you sent me, like you see some of the provisions, like use of force, like use of chokeholds and other actions that restrict breathing from being applied above the chest unless an officer is in a situation that authorizes deadly force. I'm fine with chokeholds. I have no issue with chokeholds that pass beyond the point of subduing a person is when it becomes unlawful to me. The use of tasers, in the military, I mean, we use non-lethal force. So using a taser is non-lethal, and it's a reasonable use of escalation of force. In fact, I think maybe all officers need to have tasers, unless they medically cannot have one because they themselves would be adversely affected from it.
Of course.
But I mean, if you give all officers a taser, give all officers their body cameras, I mean, and then put some more laws on it. One of the ideas I had too, I think that kind of would help with like the more of the policing crisis, because I think there is somewhat of a policing crisis in the U.S.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because we are a very fascist police state, whether people like it or not.
Absolutely.
And it's this. Did you know that the same article in the United States Code that prevents violent offenders from ever owning firearms again also prohibits those who have been dishonorably discharged from the military from ever owning firearms ever again?
I did not. That's interesting.
Yeah, so the federal law says that. That's
strange. I didn't know that.
So why do we not have some kind of system that once law enforcement gets fired for some kind of violent offense,
why would they ever be allowed to own a gun again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we should have a law enforcement equivalent of a dishonorable discharge, a national database, national
and to be honest with you,
police brutality registry that you have to be permanently registered on and makes you ineligible to be a police officer again.
Right. Well, I was going to say, I mean, you're in the military and you may be able to speak to this, but I don't know that I even agree with, like, if you're dishonorably discharged, that means you can't own a firearm. I don't know that those things necessarily follow. You know what I mean? So what's the justification there? Because you could be dishonorably discharged for something that may not relate to you being a violent individual who doesn't know how to handle a firearm, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't know the reasoning behind it, but I looked it up, and I had, I'm going to Google it again really quickly, but I almost think that also kind of will help mitigate some of that policing crisis.
I agree.
Here's my issue with it, and I've said this so many times before with you, and it's one, it's law enforcement is tied at the hip with the government, so that's problem number one. Problem number two is you have a lot of good people, good officers out there that actually care about, community policing, being a good presence in the community, trying to, execute justice in a way that is equal for all peoples, and just trying to be good to citizens because they actually have a idealistic, well-motivated approach to the career that they have chosen. And you have the few that go out on a power hunt and ruin it for everyone.
Yeah, I agree.
That also, that makes it even worse because they're already tied to the hip with the court system, with the government. And now you have, for lack of a better term, a bunch of assholes running around who are just dicks to the citizenry, the common person, thinking they're above the law when really everyone is below the law. The law is over us. It covers us all and applies to all of us equally. Mm-hmm. And I mean, qualified immunity has a lot to do with that too.
Absolutely.
There's a lot to be said that needs to be fixed in policing, and the cash bail thing. Like, I kind of can buy into that a little bit with do we actually truly believe in innocent until proven guilty?
Yeah.
And I think some of the logic, at least on the conservative side, is well, yeah, we believe that, but they are also accused, and while they're accused, why don't we keep them away from being exposed to the people?
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you why, because that's not justice, right? Justice is doing what is morally right and fair, and it's about having a proper treatment and application of appropriate responses, right? So if I'm going to say that my system is just, if I'm going to say it's the justice system, then holding people, detaining them in boxes or cages while we figure out whether or not what you did is wrong, while we figure out what you did was wrong, is, in my opinion, it's wrong to do it that way. I think that we need to have a system that does exactly what this act proposes, which is we say, listen, you've been accused of a crime. All right. We need to assess whether or not you are a flight risk. And once we assess whether or not you're a flight risk, then, then we'll take steps from there. But we're going to release you because we don't have any evidence that says 100% that you did this crime. We're going to go ahead and release you on some sort of monitoring status so that we can keep track of you, and make sure you don't take off. But beyond that, and depending on the level of crime you committed, we'll probably tier that, right? We talk about tiered systems. That'll probably be your tiered system. So you'll have, you may go home scot-free, right? Because you had a low-level accusation. If you come into the prison accused of murder one, right? Number one, if we're accusing you of murder one, we probably have some sort of evidence that points to you, right? And so you're probably not going home, more than likely. If you come in a situation where, let's say, because somebody's going to say something like, well, what if you were a drunk driver and you crashed into someone and you killed someone? Well, in that situation, we have sufficient evidence to show that you did this crime. And so you're not going home. This pretrial release status is purely about you come to the court there is no evidence that says for sure you committed this crime, and we're going to let you go home for right now as we determine at the trial whether or not you committed this crime, at which point you'll be remanded into custody so that we can have you go through your sentence. Right now, as a prison abolitionist, right? That's not, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that this act seeks to create exactly what it said, right? What the description of the act is. It's a safety, accountability, fairness, and equity today act. Right? We're looking to create safety, accountability, fairness, and equity. And so anybody that doesn't want that to be the case, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, this is supposed to be the fabric of the country we live in and what it's built on. Is it or is it not? Right? Like that's what we've got to get to. Is it or is it not? So
I did some research, right? And this is the whole military thing, the discharge thing, as far as justice is concerned, in relationship to policing. Because I said I'd Google it, so we'll put this out there. I kind of switched back to my thing with the blocking police. So in the military, there are two categories, John, of discharge, right?
Okay.
There is administrative discharges.
Okay.
And there are punitive discharges. Okay.
Okay.
So the administrative discharges, you have the first one is an honorable discharge.
Okay.
Pretty easy one to understand.
Exactly.
You have a lot of benefits. Hiring preference for federal jobs, GI Bill for education, home loan assistance, VA medical benefits, and retirement pay when they leave the service. Veterans with an honorable discharge may reenlist if they want to continue a military career.
Yeah.
General discharge. General discharge, the full name of this discharge is general discharge under honorable conditions. The way it differs from the honorable is it usually means there was something that prevented the service member from performing their job adequately or from meeting expected standards of conduct.
Okay.
So it probably just means that, they probably failed a PT test 3 times and were just discharged for not being able to meet the standard as far as PT is concerned.
Okay.
They probably were a very adequate.
You can get fired from the military for being out of shape?
Yes.
Okay.
It's actually it's pretty much codified, at least in Army regulation.
Really?
You can be discharged for failing PT tests, and you get 3 by regulation 3, unless the commander otherwise decides otherwise. So in the National Guard, you're not really going to see that as much because you have to maintain a force. Active duty, they will.
That is interesting. I didn't know that. So you can get fired from the military for being out of shape. Do people get fat on purpose?
Yeah, I see people get fat on purpose. Yeah. We had a dude that was probably like a 4XL uniform.
Jeez.
Yeah,
I'm trying to get fired.
Yeah.
I'm just eating everything, not working out. I am trying to get fired from the military.
Yeah, he got out.
That's interesting.
So a general discharge still affords veteran access to most veteran programs. In some instances, they may be eligible for VA medical coverage. However, they cannot reenlist and do not have eligibility for GI.
Okay.
Bill.
Got it.
And they still retain hiring preferences for federal jobs. Other than honorable discharge, the third type is other than honorable and is the most undesirable, but it's different because it is administrative. It's not punitive. So it generally is used when a service member's conduct results in punishment for violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, security violations, arrest, and conviction by civilian authorities, assault, abuse of authority, and drug violations are all examples of types of conducts that would warrant an other than honorable discharge.
Got it.
It also means they will not be entitled to veteran benefits and will not be eligible for reenlistment. They can also may see consequences in their civilian life because it is on their DD-214. DD-214 is just a Department of Defense Form 214, which just states you were in the military, for all the ignorant folks at home. What are types of punitive discharge? We have the bad conduct and you have the dishonorable. Bad conduct is slightly better than dishonorable. It's generally tied to the type of offenses committed. So you have to have a court martial to receive a punitive discharge. So for bad conduct, being drunk on duty, driving under the influence, committing adultery, or arrest for disorderly conduct are some of the things that will get you a bad conduct.
Gotcha.
Consequences, you lose rank, you lose pay, loss of military benefits. You are not recognized by the federal government as a veteran, and you are barred from owning firearms under Title 18 United States Code 3, looks like Section 922G.
Okay.
And then the same applies for the dishonorable discharge, but the dishonorable is usually tied to murder, fraud, desertion, treason, espionage, and sexual assault.
Gotcha.
Fun fact, sexual assault actually can carry the death penalty in the military.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not mad at that.
I'm not mad at it either. I wish we used the death penalty more often.
I say to people all the time. People ask me about the death penalty. I'm like, look, I think that rape should come with the death penalty. This, you know, it's just me, but
because I saw someone on Instagram, Jamar Tisby was talking about like why he's in favor of repealing the death penalty.
Yeah.
And maybe I didn't check out all of his reasoning on it, sure. But I wonder how. Let's go down that rabbit hole, like repealing the death penalty. Yeah. Do you think what's the argument for it? What would you think what would be an argument you would make for it?
For repealing
the death penalty.
So my argument is the same one I gave earlier, right? Which is we don't have a sufficient enough system of determining guilt to put people to death. I feel confident that we have put innocent people to death in the past. We have seen too many men exonerated by things like DNA evidence. We've seen too many people come forward and say, actually, I lied on the stand. He didn't commit that crime. I didn't see him do it. I was coerced. We've seen too many of those situations. And so for me, the death penalty, again, I would be a ardent supporter, except for the fact that we don't have a sufficient enough system of determining guilt. So,
yeah, I would probably say that there is. Think about this. Why would I repeal the death penalty?
Yeah.
Probably as a vote of no confidence in the government to actually be just. Like I couldn't kill people for something when I don't think the government is capable of adequately trying people.
Yeah.
And can actually bring reasonable convictions versus that which is, politically expedient.
Gotcha.
And that would be the one reason why I would repeal it. Just spitting off the top of my head.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's accurate, man. We were initially wanting to just talk a little bit about justice. I think we've talked a bit here. What else did you have before we get into recommendations?
I wanted to get a little bit more into the biblical justice and social justice, kind of compare the two. I mean, we are humble heretics after all.
Absolutely.
And so we probably do want to talk about what does the Bible say versus, what is man's practice and how do the two marry with one another. But before we do that, I think we're going to jump into a little bit of recommendation. So we'll be right back. Okay, and we are back. I'm going to just kind of take the lead in. So my recommendation for today is the song by country artist Clint Black called Cadillac Jack Favor. I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. This song is him telling the story of Cadillac Jack Favor and what happened to him. It's granted it is country music, but it is it's a good one, and there's some poignant lines in the song. Actually, one of them is if you wanted a I'm just gonna pull up the lyrics real quick. I probably should have had that queued up anyways. So here's how it goes. Let's see. Cadillac's no fallen hero, and he's never going to break. When it comes to prison radio, there's still no easy 8. And if you want the definition of a picture perfect frame, it'd be in the dictionary underneath Jack Favor's name. Yeah, it's the world's most crooked picture when it comes to being framed. Cadillac Jack Favor should be in the Hall of Fame. Really nice little rhyme scheme going on there.
Very nice.
He does have pretty simple but easy rhyme schemes going on there. But that's a very poignant statement that he makes. You know, if you want the definition of a picture perfect frame, you just look his name up. You got it. So that's my recommendation. What you got?
Yeah. So along the same lines, I'm going to recommend a movie. If you've never seen it before, I'm going to recommend that you watch Just Mercy. Just Mercy. Just Mercy is a movie based on the true story. And I'm thinking of this guy's name, Brian Stevenson. Brian Stevenson represented a gentleman by the name of Walter McMillan. And they made history in their battle. Brian goes to Alabama to defend people that he feels are wrongly convicted. He ends up getting the case of Walter McMillan, who had been put on death row in 1987 for the murder of an 18-year-old girl. And there was sufficient evidence to prove this guy's innocence. The fact that the only testimony against him came from a guy that clearly had a motive to lie. And basically Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx put on a stellar performance and tell this story, a true story of a gentleman who was convicted and put on death row and was blatantly and obviously innocent, but trapped in a system that refused to hear it. And so I recommend that you see Just Mercy. You could probably find it on streaming somewhere and just check it out tonight.
Yeah, you know, I'm gonna plug back into it because you did make a point about an unfavorable system, and the lyrics in the song also point out an unfavorable system. Almost 2 years gone, come and gone. They never solved that crime till they found one of our vagabonds already doing time. When that jailbird started singing, they all knew the words were wrong. But the sheriff and the DA and the judge all sang along. They pinned it on Jack Favor, gave him life without parole, gave Jack's freedom to the jailbird, payment on the lies he told. Just so happens that election year, everybody made out at the polls.
Very good.
Doesn't matter if you're white or black, the system.
Country music is always good for a story, man.
Very good for a story, man. Very good for a story.
Listen, as a black man, I'll tell you this. Black people like country music because of the storytelling.
Yeah.
True story.
I would be curious to hear what you have to say. Like, what are some of your favorite country songs? But that's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, we'll go down the rabbit hole another time.
Yeah, we'll be right back. All right, and we are back. So we were kind of starting to get into this issue of social justice and biblical justice. Before we do that, I think we need to put down the definition of what social justice is, and this is coming out of a dictionary. So,
yeah,
and we're going to run from the dictionary because that's going to be our epistemology for this. Social justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. Now, we have an article here that's from Liberty, so obviously we're thinking conservatives, and it's an opinion piece saying that social justice is not the same as biblical justice. At face value, just from the title, because this is the kind of world we live in, what are your thoughts?
Social justice, in terms of distribution of wealth, opportunities, privileges within a society.
And it's not the same thing as biblical justice.
Yeah, so my initial thoughts are that the words social justice tend to speak for themselves. We've defined justice at the beginning of this episode, and I think that we're just adding a social context to that. That's how I view social justice. I think that people have made it into this this whole worldview, right? But I think for me, when I think about social justice, I'm literally only thinking about adding a social context to what justice looks like. And so what does justice look like in a social context? Okay, we have okay, let's go with one of the bigger topics of the day, abortion, right? And so then the conversation should become, in our social world, what does abortion look like? In our social world, even, what does race look like? How do we talk about it? How do we approach it? In our social world, how do we talk about our financial caste system that we have in America? In our social world, in our social lives, how do we talk about the privileges and how do we approach the privileges that a person has within society? So I think that social justice really just needs to be looked at as a general concept about, hey, this thing exists. How do we, like justices in the world, how do we approach these different topics socially? And that's really just how I look at it. So, yeah.
So I'm gonna plug into this Liberty article that I sent, this opinion piece, and they have this great paragraph that this person wrote, and I think we should probably let's jump from here. The Bible defines justice in two main ways. The first carries a tone of retribution in which someone who commits sin or wrongdoing is punished for their deeds. Mm-hmm. The second definition, and the focus for this article, is a restorative justice in which those who are unrightfully hurt or wronged are restored and given back what was taken from them. I mean,
I don't have any problem with that.
I don't have any issues with that.
Right, we're talking about restorative justice. I don't have any problems with that at all.
So, in terms of the whole discussion of restitution to the descendants of slaves in the United States, I mean, there's probably a lot of us that are descended of slaves, but those who are descendant of chattel slaves in the American system,
yeah.
I mean, would that not qualify as restoration a little bit by paying some form of restitution, whether it is in the form of tax benefit or dollar payout, whatever?
Funny you should say that, Brad.
I mean, it's weird. I feel like we've talked about this before. It might have happened in an episode or two or three or four.
Funny you should mention that, Brad, because, you'll find that typically amongst the black theologians that argue for reparations, that's the exact reparations argument that they make, which is that the Bible calls for reparations. that there can be no reconciliation without restoration of what was lost. And so it's very interesting that you say that from a racial side. I don't want us to get bogged down on the topic of race alone in this episode, right?
Yeah, I mean, you also have there are so many class issues that we have going on in the United States. So it's really weird. I mean, if I were to classify some of the social structures of the United States, we would be fascist and we would be communist. And it's really weird because those two should not work together. In fact, the fascists of Europe and the 20th century hated the communists, right? Benito Mussolini, Hitler hated them. In fact, I just saw a quote here on the Humble Heretics Twitter feed, searching hashtag justice, that comes from that dictator, Benito Mussolini, and I found it very, very poignant. And it also is an indictment on the social justice of the United States. Fascism should be more appropriately be called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power.
Very interesting.
I mean, the Italian dictator ain't wrong.
Absolutely.
Because you see a lot of Americans fighting for the small business. That's another interesting of justice, right? Corporatism redirects, revenue from the local business who is more adequately able to reinvest into their community, right? And whereas the corporate just only feigns local interest, like my company only feigns us being locally, involved locally with our community. That's not to denigrate on the virtue of community service, but the corporation is in and of itself incompatible with the local business and communal thriving in the proper sense of community, not some kind of communist sense.
Totally. Let me ask you this. To what extent does power or the lack of power impact how you would assess justice, how you think about justice? When you think about that, do you think about how power is distributed amongst people?
Say that one more time. I got to rethink about that.
So I'm just thinking about how power affects people, right? And when we're having a conversation about justice,
right,
it feels relevant, like how power is distributed, social power, right?
Yeah.
In the world is distributed affects justice in my mind. And I'm just asking you your thoughts on that.
I think it does a great deal.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There is power. What if we're creating an issue that is not really there?
Okay.
With regard to power, like this is just a weird thought that just had popped into my mind.
Okay.
What if we're talking? This is not necessarily an issue of power per se, but an issue of the responsibility of power. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Because we say with wealth comes power.
Absolutely.
So, being a raging materialist and hedonist isn't really beneficial, and a misuse, and you're not really looking out for other people. You're not looking. It's how Walmart could get away for so long paying their people, a few dimes on the dollar, whereas Costco wouldn't do that. It's competitor in the wholesale club marketplace, or people like Dan Price who have this radical idea that my people should be paid a fairly decent wage because, they need to live.
Exactly.
I wonder if it's not necessarily the power in and of itself, but it's the responsibility associated with power. It's the misuse of the responsibility associated with power and authority. And when that is misused and you're being irresponsible with that which is associated with power and authority that's entailed in all of that, you get this kind of, I wouldn't say multifaceted, but there is a multiplicity of types of classes that are created that either benefit or suffer great ill from that misuse. We think about the corporation to the employee. We think about racial relations. We think about relationships between the sexes. We think about what other kind of relationships can you possibly think of? Like there's I think there's an inherent responsibility that's associated with power and authority, and a lot of the issues that we have there in regards to social justice is that misuse of power and responsibility. Like if I started a business today, right? I came into you because I know you're in the banking industry, and like, hey, I need an SBA.
Yeah.
And I use the SBA to start a business, but as the business begins to grow, I pay myself more than trying to make sure my employees get a decent raise, on some kind of scheduled basis. That's kind of a misuse of that responsibility to ensure that, I have staff that show up that are happy to be there, and willing to work and know that they're going to go home with a decent paycheck in their pocket. So the service industry, I think, is one of the most miserable places to work in the world because of that reason.
Yeah.
Like the compensation packages for that industry is so outdated, but the typical capitalist argument responds to it. The corporatist argument, I wouldn't even say it's properly a capitalist. Corporatist argument is as well, the service industry is low margin, so because it's low margin, you've got to be able to create profit somewhere, and that means, paying your people less.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to kind of refocus our conversation here, we were talking about justice, and we're talking about things like restorative justice. And we're talking about reconciliation, and we ended up talking about, we do often find ourselves having these conversations of the financial aspect of things, the economic aspect of things, and I always want to also mention inside of that the side of just being a human to humans, right? I say this to people all the time: be a person to people. I teach my children, be a person to people. What I mean by that is essentially you have to remember when you're interacting with another human being that they're a human being, right? That person has problems, and they have their own issues, and all of that, right? And I think that's an important part of this because we often lose sight of remembering that everybody's got a life that they're dealing with. And life is hard for most people, almost all of us, like 99% of us. And when you're talking to somebody, they may be giving you a hard time, but that doesn't mean that they aren't human. And so to keep that in mind. Now, that doesn't mean we don't expect respect, but it does mean that how I interact with someone is impacted by my understanding of their humanness. And so I may have a little bit more grace and patience for a person in understanding their humanness. In theology, they say the imago Dei, right? We talk about the image of God in a person, and how I bring that to a more layman's place of understanding for people is just an understanding that a person is a person, and not losing sight of that, because oftentimes what I think we're trying to communicate, even with Christians, people that say things like, well, you got to remember people are made in the image of God and you got to respect the image of God. Yeah, you got to respect that a person's a person, and don't lose sight of that. I got off on a tangent there, but I was thinking about our conversation of social justice and what some of the things that need to be talked about around social justice and how do we deal with that topic. But I think that ultimately, me and you have talked really on multiple episodes about most of these topics, but a lot of it has to do with exactly what's in that definition, right? Even from a biblical perspective, we have to answer for things like distribution of wealth. We have to answer for, you talked earlier about, or maybe this was off mic, but we were talking about equality of outcomes, right? But we don't have an equality of opportunities. And that part matters, right? We are trying to get to a place in society where we do have equal opportunity, but right now we don't have equal opportunities. We have more equal opportunity today than we did yesterday, but we're still a work in progress, I would say, right?
Yeah, I would generally agree with that. I would say the equal opportunity exists. The awareness of the equal opportunity does not exist. That's what's unequal. Is there's unequal awareness to the opportunities, because you're from Indy, right? And what you're
not originally, but I've been here long enough.
Okay, so where'd you come from then?
So I'm in Indy by way of Gary.
Okay, so in Gary, did you go to like Gary schools in a similar fashion of like IPS?
Yeah.
So and so for me, I've always been more of a suburb school district. So Pike Township on Indy's near northwest side, and then I'm kind of moved to Carmel. So that's more privilege, right? We would by using societal standards, and then Hampton Southeastern is equal. And I would say that kind of privilege, as it were.
Yeah.
And I think the privilege that we need to speak of there, because the privilege part is not cogent. I think the what do we mean by privilege? And I think we should probably define it as access to resources. That's a big part, right? And then also awareness of opportunities.
Yeah, well, and this is where I would disagree with you. I think you destroyed your own argument here in that, right? So I think that privilege is the reason there's not equal opportunity, right? If you go to school in a area that has higher economic resources, a higher tax base, greater access to means, then you're going to have better opportunity in that school system than you do in a school system that maybe doesn't have access to those same economic resources, therefore doesn't have access to the same educational tools, which means the kids don't receive the same quality of education, right? So but like when we're talking about society, we're always talking about a macro level, right?
Yeah.
So I think that privilege is the real motivating factor behind why there's not equal opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I see what you're saying. And I think you do find a weak spot, but at the same time, some of those access to resources aren't exactly uniform within that area, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the difference between, if you're an IPS but you're closer to Warren kind of ordeal, or versus downtown,
mm-hmm.
or maybe it's the kind of there's that social networking aspect, who your parents know, who you know.
That matters too, right? But
some people are more,
right?
Well, is it privilege though?
Sure, it is. I'll tell you why. So, network and things like, what's the word I'm looking for here? Nepotism, right? Those are privilege-based things. So my network is limited to who's available for me to network with, right? And that means that there is privilege, because if I am, let's say, I think the like white male thing trope is kind of tired for today, so we're going to leave that one, right? Let's say I'm a beautiful woman, right? A beautiful woman has access to things that, and beauty is subjective, admittedly, but a beautiful woman has access to things that someone who's not considered as beautiful does not have access to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Right. So I'm saying that to say that woman is going to have access to a network of people that a woman who is not considered as beautiful does not have access to. Right. So that creates what we call pretty privilege. Right. And so pretty privilege gives a woman a particular, and heck, this goes for men too, but we see it more in women because men bend more to the will of beautiful women. And men tend to hold the economic power, and then they tend to lend that power out to beautiful women. And so a beautiful woman has access now to more economic opportunities than a woman who's not considered as beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So I think there are some things that are just unavoidable in my argument, right? Like it's the privilege feeds the opportunity feeds the distribution of wealth, and the distribution of wealth feeds the lack of justice, if you will, a lot of times.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that argument works in my mind. I'm open, of course, to the disagreement. I'm just telling you how I see that in my mind.
Yeah, no, yeah, I get that. So, what do you think in regards to the matter of social justice and the redistribution of things and the distribution of wealth and such? How do you see all that working?
Yeah, so if we're talking about a redistribution of wealth,
justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within society.
Yeah, I mean, just like I just said, I think that is your question, what do I think the corrective action is?
Yeah. Is there a corrective action that's needed?
Yeah. So, well, I think a good place to start is, what is a utopia? Because I think that most people, whether they've defined it this way in their mind or not, tend to think about society in this we're trying to reach utopia kind of mindset, right? Our ultimate goal is a utopian society, right? If that's true, if that's what's in our mind, and I do think that's what most people are thinking when we talk about things like social justice and fairness and equality and everybody having all their needs met, I think that most people are thinking about getting to a place of a generally utopian society. I don't think people expect it to be perfect, but I do think that what we are aiming for in our mind is a society that is, nobody goes homeless, nobody goes hungry. We have a higher level of happiness overall. People are more satisfied and fulfilled in their lives day to day. And we're not, one of the big things is we're not all slaving for a corporation just to be able to feed our families, right? I think that tends to be the general attitude of people when you talk to them about what they want to happen. With that in mind, what corrective action needs to happen in regard to the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society? In the American society, I think what needs to happen is we need to go back to the drawing board and reconfigure and think more deeply about how we could better utilize our resources. I think that would be helpful. I actually don't have any ambitions of utopia for humans. But what I would like to see is a system that, on paper at least, did everything it could to create a fair and equitable society. I don't expect people to always be in line with that, which is why I said I don't expect perfection, right? I believe we need to design the police force, for example, to behave the right way. That doesn't mean that no police officer will ever go awry. But right now we have a police force that by design equips police officers to go awry, right? And so that's where my mindset is. We have to fix that part. Like the design of the system needs to be right. People will always go off the path, but you got to at least cut a path right. Cut a proper path before you can expect them to do anything else, right? Right now, we empower police to be abusive and power hungry and controlling, and that's over everybody, right? Like we talk about a lot of the police brutality amongst Black people, but make no mistake, white people, like you are also a victim, you know?
Yeah, we are all victims of the state, right?
Yeah.
Back in an upcoming conversation we're going to have, that kind of whole thesis of that book is we are victims of the state, pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's just 1984 coming up soon. Hopefully, within the next couple of episodes, we'll be getting into that. But
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think things should be more fair, but there's this notion that we would want everyone to have the same starting line, right? We imagine that picture of hey, everyone stand here at the same line. Okay, all right. If you're white, take 5 steps forward. If you're Black, take 3 steps back. If you are a white female, take 3 steps back. White males, take 2 steps forward. Now, on your mark, set, go, run. To some defined finish line, right?
Yeah.
That's just a very generic form of that social experiment. And,
sure.
I mean, there's a great deal of accuracy in that, right? Because we also can think, all right, well, we take into our family's economic stuff. We take into account, how much of an active participant are my parents in regards to teaching me the things I need to know about the world. Are they to kind of key in on Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad? Are you learning rich dad lessons or are you learning poor dad lessons? Are you going to be learning about things that will keep you in the middle class and poor forever? Or are you learning the right lessons that will allow for you to propel yourself into more opportunity and more privileges with the associations that you have? And I would love everything to be perfectly even, but I think the reason why capitalism is the way it is and the way it's honestly is the best system when it was practiced the way it used to be practiced, because it's not practiced the same way anymore, is because it turned greed in a way into a tool for good. And I think we need to get to this point where we people are given that proper education of, what's a good debt relationship? How do you relate to debt in a positive kind of way? And what debt relations are just on a money level, like what relationships with debt is a good thing, what relationships with debt is a bad thing. And there are different schools of thoughts on that. I mean, you could be a Ramsey guy and say, the slave, the debtor is a slave to the creditor kind of attitude. You could be a little bit more, like Robert Kiyosaki, Grant Cardone, I use debt to make money. I think the balance is somewhere there in the middle. I shouldn't be going into debt, for making liability purchases. But, I didn't have that lesson growing up. If I had those lessons growing up about having good relationship to debt, despite having graduated from a very affluent area, high school from a very affluent area, had I had some of those lessons, I probably would be in a lot better situation today.
Yeah.
And so that's where I say some of it is like a lack of awareness or a lack of education, not only just on a family front, but also on the school front. That to cite a musical, Wicked, there's a number called Dancing Through Life, and it opens up this line. The trouble with schools is they always try to teach the wrong lessons. Dun, da, da. Well, those are the next couple of notes after that, after he sings that line, but that's what it is. The trouble with schools is they always trying to teach the wrong lessons.
Yeah.
It's just a question of which school district are you in and the level of wrong lessonsness that you're going to get. And when you don't have the funding like an IPS, you're setting all the kids up to fail, and it just turns into like a social agenda camp more than it is actual education. And in the more affluent areas and private schools and such, they're set up with all the insider information that helps them springboard them a lot easier into a good, decent future.
Agreed.
I think that's about all I can say on the matter.
Yeah. Well, look, I think what I'll add to that is that, one, I think that there are always going to be outliers and always going to be exceptions to the rule. But generally speaking, right, when it comes to generational wealth, it's an undeniable statistical fact that white males have a higher level of general wealth than pretty much anybody, right?
That's I mean, maybe nowadays, but that wasn't necessarily true in the 40s and the 50s.
Okay, so let's put it like this. In comparison to me as a black man, right? Far and away and growing, mind you, is the number when it comes to what wealth looks like for white men versus black men. So I can speak to that much, right? The net worth of the typical white family 10x is easily the average net worth of a black family. And that has grown, that gap has grown, right? And there's a reason for that. I'm saying that to say this. Historically, what we have to deal with is the fact that there was, you talk about the thought experiment of the track, right, and the race. The problem with the race, we're talking about, like, you were talking about, like, if you're a white male, take a couple steps forward. You're talking about literally 400 years where we didn't even get let off the starting blocks, right? And that's the part. So for 400 years, white people in America got to run the track, right? Multiple laps before we ever got let out of the starting blocks. And then when we got out of the starting blocks, we have a history in this country of where the white folks here were upset that we got out of the starting blocks. And so they were doing things to prevent our progression forward on the matter.
I would say but yeah, it's true. We did as more of an ethnic group prevent a lot of it. Like, I would admit that much. I mean, I'm willing to admit that. So that's not my point. My point is, so now let's go 1865 to 2022. The reason you see a lot of what you see is because while J.P. Morgan Chase was creating a legacy of wealth on the backs of a lot of different groups and corruption, right? While a lot of the biggest, to be honest with you, a lot of the biggest companies in this country have a history that's attached to the economic foundation of slavery, right? We can't deny that there is a legacy of wealth that was created. And inside of that process of that wealth that was created by those people, they also prevented that legacy from being created for a lot of other people. Now, I want to say this as well, because I just want to say at this episode, typically you're only going to hear me talk about black folks because I'm black. But to be perfectly honest with you, there are plenty of white people that
believe that they're a part of that group that are actually a part of my group, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of white people in this country have been sold this idea that they belong to this special group that is far and away the leading group of people on the planet, right? And in reality, you've been duped because the people that you're following behind that you believe have your interest in mind don't actually have your best interest in mind, and they are using you as well to build their own legacy off of and leave you in the dirt. And if ever we get to a place where everyone is ready to admit that we have a financial caste system in this country that has pushed the majority of people, no matter what color they are, down and lifted up a very, very, very small minority of people, I'm talking about 1%, 2% of people up, the sooner we get to admitting that, the better off we'll all be. But that's just from the financial side. So,
Yeah. I had some I was going to say, but I can't remember what that was. Yeah, so I'm rested there. I mean, that was some good stuff. So we appreciate everything that everyone does. All this is just one giant conversation, and we'd love for you to jump in this conversation and kind of just give us your feedback. What are the nuances? What did we miss? Is there something you want to add to it? To the conversation that we just had in regards to justice? Is there something that maybe we should have talked about more that you'd like to hear in the future? Let us know. You can connect with us on Twitter, Humble Heretics 2, Instagram, Humble Heretics, TikTok, Humble Heretics. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/Humble Heretics. That is something that we would hope that some of you would be able to take advantage of, to come join the conversation, to support the conversation, and to give us feedback on how we are doing, and to even dive into some more private conversations between us. So if you like what you're doing, we hope that you'd give us some support, and we appreciate everyone who gives this show a listen, and we hope you have a wonderful day, and God bless.